Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tal Howard, and I direct the Jerusalem and Athens Forum, which is hosting, obviously, this event tonight. And let me just welcome you all here, especially I see a number of faces from off campus, and give you a especially hearty welcome. For you students, if you do not know, can you hear me okay? It sounds a little funny in my, you're hearing me okay? Okay. If you do not know what the Jerusalem and Athens Forum, or the JAF program, as it's, I think, affectionately called, there's some literature outside about that, and for some of you students who might be interested in participating in the program in the future, I hope you'll take the time to find out. This is exciting. I'm nervous, and I'm not even debating here. But in the context of these debates over the years, and it's hard to believe this is the seventh of these debates, students in the program have debated American foreign policy, Christian sexual ethics, just war, Muslim-Christian relations, and a number of others. But tonight, they're taking on a topic, Christianity and the free market economy, that I think is especially important for our times, and I know that's one that's often discussed and debated in various classrooms here on campus. So we're honored to kind of give this a kind of a large public hearing of this debate, so to speak. I want to do three things before I turn things over to them. It's just first to introduce the students, and then to go over a few ground rules, especially for you, the audience. And then to read the resolution aloud. I will say, before that, however, a word about how the topic is selected, because I think sometimes this is shrouded in mystery. And I did not consult the Oracle of Delphi or anything too mysterious, but it's what I call a sort of democracy, where students are giving a long list of possible topics, and they're asked to weigh in on whether they would like to debate it or not, and where they might stand on the resolution. Generally, in the past, this has sort of eliminated things negatively, helps me find out what they really don't want to discuss. But this year, this was their number one topic, which I find all the more remarkable since it's a topic on economics, and none of them are econ majors, and few of them even taking classes in economics. But they all recognize this as an important topic. I think the vote came shortly after one of my colleagues, Ian DeWeese Boyd, gave a talk on greed and the thought of Thomas Aquinas, and that began them to thinking about ethical questions. I think this is one reason related to a market economy and being a consumer and a citizen in a market economy. Well, let me go ahead now and introduce the students, and maybe you could just raise your hand when I call your name out. Molly Connolly, this is the affirmative case, or the pro team. Molly Connolly, Laura Farnham, Ian Good, Margaret Ivy, Laz Mansilla, Rachel Plorda, and Tala Strauss. And each team has a group leader, and for the affirmative case, it was Ian Good, so thank him. For the con team, the negative case, Maya Matson, Katie Nellis, Matt Neiswinter, John Ozuna, Abigail Sargent, Kira Slowinski, and Mark Woodfill. And Kira served as the group leader for the con team. The debate, you should have these handouts, or look on with your neighbor, because I want to say just a few things about how the evening will unfold. There'll be a sequence of statements and rebuttals, and then there'll be a time from questions from the audience, more about that in a minute, and then there'll be a little time for them to ask one another questions. Before the final concluding statements, beginning with the pro team and then the con team. If you look under the notes to the audience, a few things I want to highlight, because you play an important role in this debate, whether you knew that or not before showing up here tonight, because there will be a vote at the end of the debate, and Ryan Groff, and let me just pause right here in the middle of everything, and just, if you'll, he helped organize all of this. This is the program coordinator of the JAF program. he's worked with the teams in setting this up, so I should do this more often, but I and all of the students are deeply in his debt this evening. But at the end of the debate, we'll ask all the students to exit here, and you will vote on which team you think made the most persuasive argument. And here's the ethical challenge for you, because I want you to debate on not your loyalties to the individual, not how much they bribed you, how much if your roommate said they're going to clean up for the rest of the semester, but who you think, which team you think made the most persuasive case for their position. So, in other words, I'm trying to ask all of you to kind of come outside of your personal views and try to just take stock of the content of their oratory, their public speaking, to make a compelling case. And then we'll tally them all up, and we'll decide a winner at the end. When you do have opportunity to ask questions, we have a couple of roving microphones. I'd ask that they be succinct and directed to a specific team. So this is not an opportunity. People came to hear them, not necessarily you, but I hope many of you will ask good, sharp, incisive questions. But it's not an opportunity to be long-winded. Nor is it an opportunity, I think some in the past have kind of aimed for humor, but kind of wound up in glibness in some of their answers. So no short-winded glibness, but good incisive questions, which hope I haven't scared you from asking questions now. And finally, I'll say that the positions argued by the students do not necessarily represent their positions. Some of them might and some of them might have developed different positions in the course of preparing for the debate. So, they're not experts. They've been given in the later part of the fall semester. They've been given the topic, and they've had about 4 months to kind of put everything together. This is a student-owned and operated enterprise. I have no idea exactly what speaking roles they will occupy or how they're going to lay out their arguments. So this is, I'm proud to say, hope they're proud to say that it's very much driven by them. So let me read the resolution. And actually, because of some of the vagaries, which many of you will recognize, of how you define a free market economy, I do have a little qualifying paragraph. So when I read the resolution once, and I'll offer the qualifying paragraph, it's not technically part of the resolution, but students have had this all along. So not completely all along, but you will have this as well, but it's not technically part of the resolution. But resolved, a free market economy provides the greatest hope to alleviate poverty and is compatible with Christian ethics. That's the resolution. The qualifying paragraph. Adam Smith's classic work, The Wealth of Nations, was designated as the touchstone text for defining a free market economy. Furthermore, it has been made clear to students that the affirmative case does not necessarily have to argue for a libertarian position, nor the negative case for socialism, even if the former might be close to libertarianism and the latter close to socialism on a political economic spectrum. So we're not talking about the extremities of the spectrum. I'm tempted to comment more on the qualifying paragraph, but let me just stop there. I'll read the resolution again. A free market economy provides the greatest hope to alleviate poverty and is compatible with Christian ethics. Actually, for dramatic effect, I'll read it one more time. A free market economy provides the greatest hope to alleviate poverty and is compatible with Christian ethics. And with that, we'll turn it over to the pro side's opening statement.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. Winston Churchill once said, "A democracy is the worst system, except for all the others." The same is true for a free market system. The system has flaws, as does anything in a fallen world, but we can guarantee that you will not hear another practical argument for the free market system in this debate. A free market is a loose framework in which people can choose how they acquire and use their wealth. A helpful image is the city traffic pattern. There are clear signs and rules to the road, but people are free to drive where they choose. The alternative to this system is one in which a central figure of authority, tries to avoid speeding and accidents by dictating to each driver where they are to go and how they are to get there. This is analogous to controlled markets as found in communist and socialist societies, societies in which people do not have the freedom to choose how they acquire and use their wealth. While speeding and accidents happen in a free system, it is better for the government to simply place stop signs and set speed limits. This allows people to choose the direction of their lives. The poor are those who cannot enter this free market system. They are excluded from the community of exchange. They are often dependent on charitable or governmental handouts. The poor may not have the capacity or opportunity to improve their lives. They may not have any marketable skills, and they are silenced because of their lack of power. Because the Bible affirms the dignity of all human beings made in the image of God, Christian ethics demands that we help the poor maintain the dignity as uniquely gifted stewards of God's creation. In order to do that, the poor need to be able to enter the economic exchange community. But all solutions to poverty, such as employment, education, and microfinancing, depend on a market economy. Employers depend on the health of the economy to hire new workers. Schools depend on funds for resources and teachers. Microfinancing assumes that there are already wealthy individuals willing to give loans to the poor. A flourishing economic system in which people can pursue their interests supports the flourishing of other parts of society. The free market emphasizes partnership rather than paternalism, and directly gives the poor the opportunity to escape poverty by their own efforts. A free market economy is consistent with Christian ethics not only because it helps people out of poverty, but also because it affirms stewardship of a good creation by human beings made in the image of God. The Bible affirms human dignity and the value of human beings pursuing individuals' vocations by stewarding creation. The free market is compatible with Christian ethics, therefore, because it allows individuals to pursue vocation. The free market gives dignity to those who participate in it. Human dignity is maintained when people can make their own choices. Christian ethics support the dignity of all human beings created in the image of God, and if wealth can help restore the dignity of the poor, Christians should do nothing but support the wealth creation made possible in a free market system. The free market is the best method of creating wealth. In the same way, it provides the greatest hope to alleviate poverty by providing the poor with access to the circle of economic exchange. Adam Smith's principle of a free market system also supports allowing people to pursue their individual vocations and makes their lives better for themselves and others. Alleviating poverty means giving the poor the opportunity to become active participants in the free market community. In many countries, the poor are powerless to change their circumstances. However, the free market system gives the poor more power by allowing them to pursue their interests. The market does encourage self-interested behavior, but it is important to distinguish between self-interest and selfishness. Selfishness assumes that the self is the end of one's pursuit, fulfilling personal desires at the expense of the welfare of others. Self-interest, however, is healthy and natural. Michael Novak qualifies self-interest. Under self-interest, then, fall religious and moral interests, artistic and scientific interests, and interests in justice and peace. The interests of the self define the self. In a free society, persons are free to choose their own interests. It is part of the function of a free economy to provide the abundance which break the chain of the mere struggle for subsistence and to permit persons to find themselves, indeed to define themselves through their own interests. Self-interest allows for the further cultivation of human dignity and also for the creation of wealth that alleviates poverty. We do not claim that the market itself is the only sphere that must be working properly to solve the problem of poverty. Governments have a role in upholding contracts, private property, and protecting people's basic rights and freedoms. The poor need to be given the opportunity to become actors in the economy so that they may become full-fledged, functioning members of a vibrant community. The market system allows people to work with dignity and to use their wealth to improve their lives. It has generated progress in society that has done more to feed, clothe, shelter, and heal people than all the charity and church programs in history. Since God is consistently concerned with the poor in Scripture, those criticizing Christian ethics of capitalism should be cautious to critique a system that has brought technology and opportunity to alleviate poverty and raise living standards worldwide. This is precisely why we say that the market system is the worst system, except for all the others. Sorry, I have a book.
Good evening. Tonight, the Pro Team has presented the free market economy as merely a loose framework where we are free to choose. And you hear that language, we are free to choose. But they neglect to understand that this framework is not morally neutral. The free market economy is not only not a moral actor, whereby it chooses, the invisible hand is not the hand of providence, but it is not a morally neutral system, which means it's a system where values are embedded within, and so as such, it acts upon us, meaning that our choices are somewhat limited. 2, we wholeheartedly agree that human dignity and human dignity of the poor especially is of utmost concern. But how can we support a system where people are reduced to their role as economic actors, something that we will be exploring later on? We also question whether or not a free market truly exists. A free market economy is a misnomer. Genuinely free markets do not exist, where free is defined as free from coercion, manipulation, and misinformation. They do not exist in a real world of advertising, trade agreements, and embargoes, and corporate monopolies. We are also concerned about the language of just equal opportunity. Equal opportunity is one thing, but equal equality of outcome is another. A child who goes to school with an empty belly has a much different experience than a child who goes to school with a full belly. Even though they receive the same type of education, what they get out of that education differs considerably, because it's not just that they have the same equality of opportunity afforded to them. And we would be remiss to neglect that reality. Thank you.
Good evening. For most of us, questioning the free market is unthinkable. We've grown up believing that the free market and a capitalist system are the most logical, liberating choices we have. The fall of the Soviet Union and the horror of tyranny confirm our conviction that freedom is best and that flourishing comes with free opportunity. Our experience has shown us that the free market is the most efficient system we have for creating wealth, furthering technology and innovation, and stimulating economic growth. We are not arguing that these developments are wrong. On the contrary, God wants what is good for us. He delights in the prosperity of his servant. Scripture is replete with examples of how God blesses his people with material goods and rewards them for faithfulness and hard work. Perhaps we've seen some of that blessing through the free market. But as Christians, we know that any human system is flawed. We must not put our hope in the free market or assume too quickly that it is the best system we can establish. Instead, we should reevaluate our system and be willing to answer God's call to holiness in all areas of life. Our current free market system does not measure up to God's call. When closely examined, the theory of the free market reveals a fundamentally unstable foundation of self-interest. And in practice, it has undermined human flourishing by aggravating reductionism, materialism, and injustice. Christians should not condone an economic system that inevitably leads to vice. Adam Smith's model of the free market operates completely on the basis of self-interest. When involved in trade, according to Smith, one should never count on the goodwill of others, but only their self-concern. For a person in trade will be more likely to prevail if he can interest the other party's self-love in his favor, and show them that it is for their own advantage to do for him what he requires. This method of trading one surplus for another's is rational, pleasant, and productive. It is familiar to us. But as Christians, we must ask ourselves whether self-interest should be the basis of our economic practice. God does not call us to be thoughtless, to care for ourselves and our families, but he does urge us to be concerned with the welfare of others. As Paul says in Philippians 2:4, each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Perhaps it seems too harsh to call self-interest a vice, but as sinful human beings, we have a difficult time distinguishing between what is healthy concern for the self and what is selfishness and greed. It is not enough to hope that our self-serving actions are not harming anyone, nor is it enough to convince ourselves that giving to charity from what we have earned through self-interest cancels out the consequences to our own souls. With Jesus as our example, we should orient ourselves toward the welfare of others and be willing to sacrifice our own comfort. Jesus never called us to conform to the patterns and desires of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. When thus transformed, we see people as fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of their Creator. Conversely, the free market reduces people to cogs in a machine. People are defined by their economic roles, and their worth is determined by their profits. Who has not heard or felt, even against their own true belief, that the elderly, children, the handicapped, or disabled are an economic drain, a burden on society? In a free market system, it becomes increasingly easy to measure people by their productivity and utility. The reduction of society to an economic machine removes essential realities of humanity. Human life is relational, communal, and spiritual with eternal significance. In 1944, Karl Polanyi pointed out the paradox of this situation. As we strive to make the market perform more efficiently, we come in danger of annihilating the human and natural substance of society. In addition, we begin to view our time and relationships as means toward an economic end. As economist Paul Williams writes, we continually extend markets into areas of life beyond those that obviously involve business and wealth creation. These have come to include education, healthcare, the legal system, and even marriage, the church, and the political system. We are under constant pressure to treat learning, caregiving, justice, sexuality and family life, church services, and voting behavior as consumer transactions. Such an attitude demeans and subverts the essence of these activities, which by their nature should not be reduced to a matter of individual consumer choice. This reductionism has consequences for the people operating within the free market. Our tendency to view people as economic tools has led to poor treatment of laborers. Many of our factories conceal the ugly face of oppression. This is especially true when the U.S. outsources work to other nations so that products can be sold more cheaply to Americans. In regions such as Southeast Asia and South America, factories and sweatshops offer people low-paying manual work that gives them little hope for promotion and little security for long-term employment. Furthermore, these people are forced to work for long hours and under harsh conditions with little health regulations, all to keep the price of production as low as possible. The free market searches for the cheapest labor force available to increase revenue, without regard to justice. Human beings are forgotten behind the graphs of the stock market. As human lives are translated into numbers and the materials they produce, the most vulnerable people are oppressed for the sake of cheap products. In its propensity to reduce the living and sacred to the utilitarian and mechanical, the free market is in direct conflict with Christian ethics. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. I would like to remind everybody that to suppress the freedom of the markets is to suppress human rights. I would like to respond to the allegations of the other team against self-interest in the work of multinational corporations in foreign countries. I would like to remind them of the command of Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. Loving your neighbor is in your self-interest. To love your neighbor, you must start with the interest in yourself. And to truly love our neighbor, we must do that first. And I would argue that taking care of your family and the poor of your community is in every person's self-interest. Christian ethics does teach us to care for the poor, and what better way to do this than to welcome them into the community of economic exchange? We are not meant to deny ourselves or be poor to serve God. God placed us in a garden surrounded by wealth, and he affirms that as good. I would like to also respond to the allegation that the competitiveness of the market encourages vice. And competition is not the end of the market. Competition is only the means to a good end of lower prices and better wages for all. And the alternative to this nonviolent competition of the free market is theft, violence, and crime. And that these vices exist in every economic system. Who was more corrupt, our politicians or communist leaders in Eastern Europe? And I would like to respond to the point that multinational corporations exploit laborers in foreign countries. Oftentimes, those are the best paying jobs in those countries, and the alternative would be subsistence farming and barely being able to feed your family. Those jobs make it possible for families in the developing world to send their children to school and feed themselves. Thank you.
Imagine what the world was like before the free market economy, before the publication of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and the birth of the first democratic capitalist nation, the United States, in 1776. Famines devastated the civilized world on an average of once a generation. Epidemics, unchecked by medicine, desolated entire towns. In the undeveloped world, potable water was largely unavailable. In the 1780s, 4/5 of French families spent 90% of their income on bread alone. In 1795, the life expectancy in France was under 28 years for women and 24 years for men. Today, the picture is not nearly as bleak. This can be attributed to the free market system. In India, a country that is still considered to be developing, life expectancy now averages 64 years. Even countries resistant of the free market benefit from the production and sale of goods created through the market system. With the help of a microfinance loan, Editha Bancoro of the Philippines was able to expand her food market and eventually send all 6 of her children to college. Another woman, Miriam Zombezi of Tanzania, received $500 in the form of a loan. She now owns a general store where she employs 2 people. Her profits make it possible for her to afford the fees, supplies, and clothing to send her 3 young children to school. Elsewhere, corporations are realizing the untapped market of selling to people in poverty. A tech firm in India was able to build a network of internet-connected computers that allowed local farmers to check fair market prices on the Chicago Board of Trade. They are able now to sell their crops for $6 more per ton than previously received. The same network helps farmers buy seeds, fertilizer, and other materials directly with significant savings. Today, the network reaches 1.8 million farmers. The beginnings of a consumer market power at the poorest level of Indian society. Christian ethics shows that the greatest hope for alleviating poverty lies not in redistribution, but in cultivating stewardship out of gratitude. In the Old Testament teachings, all things are from God. The Israelites were also aware of the responsibility towards the poor that accompanied God's gifts. Though generosity is commanded, it is never in a way that demands all of a person's private property. Otherwise, they would be unable to give loans or allow the poor to glean from their fields. The prophets and wisdom literature warn against trusting in riches, which leads to self-reliance apart from God. However, all wealth ownership is not evil, for there are many examples in Scripture of those who are faithful stewards with their money. The converted Zacchaeus voluntarily gave half of his wealth to the poor. God would not have placed Joseph in charge of Egypt's resources in a time of famine, or granted the request of Jabez, blessing him with an enlargement of his territory, if wealth led directly to greed. Deuteronomy 8:18 reminds us that the creation of wealth is not a vice, But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. We learn of a proper Christian attitude towards wealth from Jesus' parable of the talents. The servants who traded and invested their master's wealth wisely were rewarded with greater responsibilities over cities. One servant, however, was fearful of responsibility and hid his share. Not only did his master scold him, but gave his reward to the other man who invested wisely. The servants who multiplied their master's wealth were fulfilling the creation mandate to be fruitful and fill the earth. In the words of John Schneider, for those who demonstrate godliness, the creative and productive economic life becomes something that is absolutely true to our humanity and to the identity of God. For we, who have good reason to believe that God has truly blessed and entrusted us with wealth and the ability to create it, creative and productive economic living is both a mandate and a blessing. While wealth can be a dangerous, corruptive power, it can also be used responsibly when we are good stewards of our master's resources. It is the free market that allows for the participation of others in the creation of wealth and opportunity.
Good evening. The Pro team has pointed out that the market produces wealth, and we certainly do not want to argue against the fact that it has been the most efficient system for creating wealth, great wealth. However, we have a problem with the methods and assumptions that it brings to this creation of wealth. We think that the creation of wealth is not a bad thing, but that it's not enough to justify this system for our use. We also think that they have been putting morals into the market that are not actually there. There are moral people acting in the market, but the fact that we can work through a market and any flawed system, by God's grace, we can work through to bring good, does not make the market necessarily compatible with Christian ethics. We shouldn't have to subvert the system that we live in order to promote Christian ethics. Another point that they made was the fact that the market has somehow promoted science. We would like to actually take issue with that. Medicine emerged more from the Enlightenment than from the free market, and though some of these advances have been promoted by the free market, most research and development in the last several decades has been promoted by government funding and not by corporations competing in a free market and trying to produce better products. Also, the fact that the free market is the best that we have, we find a little bit fatalistic. Mercantilism was the best that they had until Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. And we are hoping and looking for a better system. We're hoping that, and seeking something that will perhaps make capitalism look as foolish as mercantilism looks today. Thank you.
Dependent on economic expansion, the free market distorts both need and desire. This behaviour presents pressing moral and societal concerns. Morally, we recognise that the free market is not simply a neutral system. It carries with it a set of values that are clearly in conflict with Christian ethics. While the Bible encourages faithful dependence on our Creator, with a spirit of generosity, joy, and contentment, the market functions quite differently. The health of this economic system relies on man's discontent, desire for material fulfillment, and envy of another's things. In order to thrive, the market must grow, and to do so, it must deform our sense of need. Companies achieve sales by manufacturing desire, fostering a continual lust for more. Like a Ponzi scheme of global proportion, consumers are persuaded to buy more and more luxuries and non-essentials in order to keep the economy afloat. In its drive to capture our attention, our wallets, and our loyalty, the market breeds advertising of all kinds. A successful entrepreneur isn't just the one who makes the best product, but the one who convinces the public that he has done so. Companies desperate to sell us what we don't need seek to corrupt our desires in order to reduce us to mere consumers. Political theorist Benjamin Barber points out that when religion or politics colonize every sector of what should be our multidimensional lives, we call the results theocracy or tyranny. He asks why, when the marketplace, with its insistent ideology of consumption and its orthodoxy of spending, colonizes every sector of what should be our multidimensional lives, do we call the result liberty? Aggressive advertising, in effect propaganda, reduces liberty by obstructing our ability to make wise, well-informed choices that are beneficial to us and to those around us. This integral part of the free market actually undermines our true freedom. Though the Bible urges us to be content, most fall under the market's material influence. Instead of laying up our treasures in heaven, we cling to the things that moth and rust destroy. Here we raise another grievance against the free market. While it works doggedly to disguise desire as necessity, the system fails to address the actual needs of the poor. Barber observes that we live in a declining global consumer economy, unable to sell the poor what they need, it doesn't pay, but trying desperately to sell the prosperous what they don't need. Although much of the population has urgent needs, they have little purchasing power. When only an affluent minority can exert their demands on the market, wealth cannot be divided equitably. Instead of participating in the system, the poor become its victims. Those with little income are without representation in the marketplace. Proponents of the free market argue that, though uncomfortable, this economic inequality spurs on financial growth and opportunity, promising a brighter future for all. However, a look at America's financial crisis and stunning income disparity dispels this claim. As of 2007, the top 20% of American households owned 85% of all privately held wealth. This leaves a meager 15% of the wealth for the bottom 80%. While median wages have declined in real terms over the last 3 decades, CEOs continue to earn upwards of 344 times the pay of an average worker. Not only that, but free market supporters often overlook the sociological aspect of this disparate financial growth. New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof writes, "When inequality rises, the richest rake in their winnings and buy even bigger mansions and fancier cars. Those a notch below then try to catch up and end up depleting their savings or taking on more debt, making a financial crisis more likely. It's clear that instead of sustaining the market system, our recent levels of inequality actually suppress economic growth. While a lucky few find prosperity, many are led to bankruptcy and financial distress. Job losses and home loan foreclosures and the human consequences, such as family breakups and loss of dignity, disproportionately affect the poorest members of society." Within the free market, we find that power and wealth rests concentrated in the hands of corporations, who dominate our economy and dictate the content of mass culture. Instead of equal opportunity, economic stability, and human flourishing, we find that the market yields injustice, vice, suffering, unemployment, and a state of constant insecurity for the vast majority of the world's population. Looking at these effects of the free market, we cannot help but conclude that its inherent centralization of wealth and power corrupts democracy, undermines the economy, and tears families and communities apart.
Good evening. It is true that there still remains inequality today, but actually, due to the free market system, everyone in the world has gotten richer. Poverty can be alleviated and has been alleviated by the free market system. We cannot solve relative poverty, but we can solve absolute poverty. And if you look historically, there has been an increase in the amount of people in the world who are living with better standards than they would have 200 years ago. Also, the Bible does call for us to be content as Christians, but would you call for the poor to remain content when they can't feed their children? And if the only way for them to feed their children is to work in a sweatshop, we can't call them out on that. As Philip Jenkinson said, an anti-capitalist critic might object that the system is thus creating more numerous artificial wants and desires, inventing ever more goods that we cannot do without. But it would be truer to say that capitalism is constantly expanding the spectrum of human capacities, broadening and deepening the range of human experience, and offering those new insights and techniques on a global scale. Also, when it comes to distribution of the technological advances that we have made, without the free market system, many people in the world would not benefit from those advances. Also, greed as a vice that is encouraged by the capitalist system is not unique to this system. It is also found in many systems throughout history, and the capitalist system actually allows for mutual benefit more often than not because of the economic exchange system. We do not want to argue that the reduction of human beings to cogs in a machine is a good thing, but we also believe that the free market system allows for people to flourish. Thank you.
Okay, now it's your turn. Again, I would just ask you to be a succinct question, and you would direct it either at the affirmative team, the pro team, the con team. The hands going up. We have two microphones coming around here. If I could just ask you to introduce yourself briefly and stand up. And why don't we start right here on the front row?
Sorry, we're not on.
Just speak really loud. The relative merits of technology and networking should not count.
Try it now.
1, 2. Ooh, there we go. Hi, my name is Emily Hutchings. I'm a business and international affairs major. And I'd like to direct my question to the negative case. I was wondering what type of economy you would advocate for. Yeah.
We would advocate one that doesn't have such incredible wealth disparity, that provides justice for all and actual opportunity, that doesn't exploit workers, that actually provides work that is not simply activity but fulfilling, that doesn't reduce our understanding of self-interest to simply material means, but is a fully holistic one as God intended in terms of our relationship with Him and others.
I'd like to make 2 more points with that. One is that a free market economy is not the only system for doing capitalism. It is a very specific set of norms and beliefs about how the market economy should and can work. So that's my first point. And the second point is that really our resolution tonight is debating the actual merits of the free market economy, and we are not tasked with providing an alternative. And to be frank, we don't know, but we are looking for that, and we are convinced that the free market economy is not satisfactory.
Sorry. Spread the wealth.
All right, yeah, I'm Alex, political studies major, and actually I had one question for each. Is that all right? Just pick one. All right. Anyways, so I'm gonna direct it to the con side and say that you've done a good job presenting that human vice is rampant in our current capitalist free market system, but how would you respond to the market structure itself, how it's structured, and how that is contrary to these ethics and stuff? I mean, yeah, human nature is rampant, but if we're living with our Christian values, is it not the case that the free market system could, in fact, be the best bet for Christian ethics?
If we were to live according to Christian ethics, the free market would completely fail. That's because Christian ethics are founded on serving one God, caring for other people, and justice. Here's the thing. The free market economy is based on self-interest and selfishness, and it can't thrive unless we are confusing our need for demand. It distorts what need is, and if we were to truly be satisfied with the way that God has provided for us, the free market would cease to exist. There would be no sense of competition. Instead, we might have relationships with each other and maybe figure some things out.
Okay, what about a question for the affirmative? This gentleman right Can you just stand up and protect the very well?
All right. So my question is for the affirmative case. My name is Paul Brown, and I'm a music major. But in my little, this hasn't really been addressed, and in my basic understanding of American history, especially the Industrial Revolution, sort of leading up to the Great Depression, we see a lot of sort of the failure of the free market economy. A lot of, especially in the Industrial Revolution, I'm from Lowell, Massachusetts, where the mill industry was, and there was a lot of oppression of workers and stuff, and certain people would get a lot of wealth but oppress others. And then leading into the Great Depression, mismanagement of the stock market, leading to extreme poverty throughout a whole decade. And this hasn't really been brought up, so I'm just wondering for the affirmative.
So a question of booms and busts and market failures? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
We're not denying. We're not denying that for the system to work properly, that people do not need to be good. And I would also like to point out that the free market has entirely eliminated absolute poverty in the United States. Even what we consider poor is what we call relative poverty. The poor in the United States aren't starving. They generally have TVs and cell phones. While they may not be as wealthy as many of us sitting in this room, I wouldn't say that they're suffering in the same way as people in countries that haven't had the opportunity to enter the free market.
It works now. Good. My name is Matt. I'm an English and philosophy major. And my question for the affirmative is, you guys have often spoke during this debate about the need for the market to be regulated by self-interest, which is likely informed by reason. However, I was wondering how you guys would respond to people not having a sense of rational self-interest because, for whatever reason, the free market and people acting within it as economic agents saw unfit to fund an education system that would leave people with a rationally deducted form of self-interest like we might be headed to here in America.
Well, I would say that, first of all, we aren't arguing for an absolutely free market because self-interest may sometimes be irrational, and a government does have a responsibility to limit excessive selfishness and other exploitative behaviors that might take place if the market were completely free. So I would agree that because Adam Smith was also aware that human beings do have this tendency to be both irrational and rational and do what's good and do what's evil. We do need those checks of the economic system. And sorry, you were also asking about, was that the fullness of the question? There was something else.
How can we kind of guarantee that we have that rational self-interest if the free market chooses not to fund an education system that provides the citizens with that sense of self-interest?
Yes. Well, I would argue that it's not necessarily the free market that's choosing whether or not to fund education, because currently in America, that's more a political question: is how do we fund education? And then I would say that justice is not limited to how individuals act in the free market, but also has to do with how we vote. So, yeah.
Good job. Hi, my name is Seth. My question is, how does a global free market economy provide for those individuals living in nations routinely excluded from economic prosperity? Because you guys have talked a lot about the American economy, but very, very little about people in countries like Niger, where they are still living in absolute poverty. This is for the pro side, affirmative case.
In nations, is this loud enough? In nations such as those in sub-Saharan Africa, they aren't necessarily participating in the free market economy or the free market system, so that would be a fault of the government or other agents, whether it be the military that takes over the government or something like that. It's not necessarily the system itself that causes poverty in those nations.
And we can also add, in countries that were impoverished, were what a lot of the developing countries are today, the ones that have accepted a free market have done nothing but improved. I mean, we can look at the differences between South Korea and North Korea. South Korea has implemented free market economics. North Korea has not. And I mean, we can look at the news, we can look at aerial photographs that show North Korea shrouded in darkness, while South Korea has light. That's a huge difference. And another thing, the free market, for Americans, it allows us to generate enough wealth to sustain ourselves and then to be able to give to people, to help build wells, to help in charities that are building schools and feeding people all over the globe. And now those charities are funded by the wealth created by the free market system.
Okay, what about a question now for the
time? I was wondering, during one of your rebuttals, you said that we're looking for we're looking for something to make the free market and to make the free market economy look as foolish as mercantilism does. Does that mean that currently we don't have any better way to go than the free market economy?
I mean, it's pretty clear that there's got to be something better. I don't understand why it seems like we've stopped thinking or something, or like the human potential has just like ended at the free market. Because, for instance, like looking at the Bible, we see that it's been founded on actually a redistribution of wealth and a community. And so in terms of that economic system, like we can say that one that cared for the poor, provided opportunity instead of just exploitation, would be far better than the free market. And so, I mean, we could look at socialism, we can look at communism, and actually what our pro team has advocated for is an entirely mixed market. So, I mean, seeing how they're doing that, we could just mix them up too. So that's fine.
Hi, I'm Aaliyah. I'm an education major, and this is for the con. My question is, you keep speaking about opportunity for everyone and opportunity for the poor, but how do you provide opportunity if you aren't giving people freedom to choose their vocation and choose how they spend their wealth?
One of our problems with the free market is that we don't actually believe that it provides people the opportunity to choose their vocation, especially the poor. Usually what happens for the poor in in other countries usually, and in America, is that they have very limited options of how they're going to sustain themselves. So we kind of think that the question goes for both teams. There's not, it's not something that the free market provides in the first place. Is there something you wanted to add to that? Okay.
Either of you two, Zach or Ingi, whichever one you want to go.
So the question I want to ask you is actually not my question, but Martin Heidegger's question. And he talks about modern technology, and if I didn't misunderstand him, I think the market economy is also included in that. And he says that modern technology estranges us from objects, and we approach objects in a different light. We actually challenge it, and we interpret objects through modern technology. And I'm wondering, does the free market economy cause like intellectual poverty today?
I would say no, partly because if you have a more developed free market system, because people have more of a choice in what kind of jobs they can find and what kind of work they can do, they're probably going to feel more, I mean, I guess you're saying they're alienated from objects or they're trying to conquer the land or something like that. But if you're interested in what you're doing and you are pursuing a vocation, it's hopefully out of love that you're making something and relating to sort of the earth or the land as something you're in relationship to. And I think that, what was the second part of your question? There's always two and I can't remember the second part. Oh, intellectual poverty. Well, intellectual capital is something that is actually more highly valued in today's free market system than it was in the past. So I would say there's more intellectual capital today. Yeah.
Okay, why don't I, at this point, see if we might come back to some questions from you guys, but let's kind of open it up to the possibility of we ask one another questions. Does the negative case have a question for the affirmative case?
We certainly do. Could you please address the issue of wealth disparity in the free market and how this actually addresses the poor, and how your whatever kind of economy you're advocating would fix this?
Okay. Well, I said in my rebuttal, there will be an inequality, so there will be a wealth disparity in any system where there's freedom. But if you're advocating redistribution, equal redistribution, completely equal, another question you could ask is, once everyone has received the equal amount of goods or equal amount of money, they would still use that differently. So they would end up having different, unequal amounts of wealth at the end of the day anyways.
Yeah, well, we'd just like to respond with the fact that in America, there's actually just like in this place of wonderful capitalism and the free market, there's incredible disparity in the economy, and it's increasing. It clearly favors the wealthy. The poor are extremely disadvantaged. So I guess, and our hope was, and this is what we keep hoping for, is that this economic inequality will spur on economic growth. But what it's actually doing is decreasing savings and promoting financial risks, because people want what other people have.
What was your question?
Sorry. Go ahead.
The question before?
Yeah, why don't you guys close them apart?
If redistribution is your answer to this inequality, who does the redistributing?
We weren't saying that redistribution, we were asking you, what kind of redistribution your system would advocate. Because in the system that we would advocate, it would be done more fairly, but we don't know if that would be done by the government or or other?
Oh, well, I guess what we were just wondering is like, as 20% of the population in America has like 85% of our national wealth. Shouldn't there be some sort of redistribution? I mean, just on sort of like a practical level in terms of the rest of the people, but also like clearly in terms of Christian ethics. How are we ignoring this?
Can I respond to that? Okay. I would say that you could definitely say that there's more wealth in America today than perhaps in many places in the world, but there's still been growth in other countries in the world. And simply because America is ahead in some ways than other countries in the world doesn't mean that those countries aren't better off because of the development of the free market system in their own societies.
Free market economy. Tennis match, okay. But free market economic policies have not been an unqualified success. In the case of sub-Saharan Africa, in the 1960s and 1970s, per capita income grew by an average of 1.6%, which, to be sure, was less than, say, Asia at the same time was growing about 5%, Latin America was growing about 3%, but it was still growing. But starting with Senegal in 1979, the IMF and the World Bank forced sub-Saharan African nations to adopt free market free trade policies that destroyed their infant industrial sectors. And the result was that the three decades later, per capita income is the same as it was in 1980. It fell by 0.7% every year during the 80s and 90s. And this was given by a professor of economics at the University of Cambridge with information from the World Bank.
Well, to your previous question, I just wanted to say that in the free market system allows for the greatest potential for people to give out of charity. It allows people to work in a way that they find personally meaningful, and also to give to needs that they find to be personally meaningful. And this is reflected throughout Scripture, the command to be generous, not the command to make sure that everything is constantly equal, because, and if you look at the Acts passage, which is commonly used to argue for a completely redistributive system, it still was voluntary, and it was, and it did not mean that those people who did give had no property left afterwards. In fact, they still had some left over that in the future they were still able to give generously with.
Misunderstanding us. We're not advocating for no property, no like that personal property can't be had. Also, we really appreciate charitable giving. However, why don't we address like the root of the problem, which is that the rich are favored and that people are exploited.
Much of what we are able to give back via charity is available because of exploitation. And we just have a problem with the fact that we have this this exploitation in the first place. That that we would need to give so much away because we don't have it. Sorry.
Just to respond sort of to the last two questions you just posed. So going back to your argument against sub-Saharan Africa, we said that we do not believe that the free market is the only thing that has to be functioning properly in order to alleviate poverty. Strong governments are needed. If there is constant warfare, if there are weak governments, then the free market cannot do well because the people themselves are not doing well. If the people cannot function properly, then there's no way that they can really take place in the free market. There needs to be a twofold system here. What we are saying is that the free market does the best to alleviate poverty, and that has been proven in many, many, many cases. And when there's a strong government, it does even more to alleviate poverty. And just addressing your idea that the wealthy are favored, in every single economic system, the wealthy have always been favored. There's mercantilism. The differences, however, were there was the knight up in his castle feasting while the serfs starved down below. The free market has eliminated absolute poverty. In countries where it's accepted, people are not starving to death anymore. That's a huge difference that we cannot ignore.
This is for the negative case. I've heard the claim that the free market is actually morally self-regulating. That is, as people come to realize that things are morally questionable, things in the economy especially, it will become, based on public opinion, it will become economically, let's say, economically unfeasible to pursue an immoral policy. How do you respond to that claim?
Looking at America, that is false. I would, or just like humans in general. First of all, in order, we said this before, in order for the economy to thrive, it has to distort our value system, whether it be Christian or just in terms of our needs and our care for other people. Also, looking at just like the incredible income disparity of CEOs and wage workers, I don't really understand how, since that's been happening for over 40 years now, why the system hasn't corrected itself. So,
and with things like, I don't know if you're trying to make a reference to like fair trade and things that have kind of come up in recent years as like market-driven like sensibilities that we've kind of developed and has come onto our radar screen. We think it's great that it can do that sometimes, but the fact that we have to wait until everyone is able to be marketable is a problem. And also the fact that it assumes that we are informed consumers, which most of the time we're not. We're informed by advertising, which is obviously not necessarily the fount of truth. So it's rewarding those who are doing things cheaply and making them look marketable, so maybe ethical. So we don't think that necessarily the ethical regulation is able to happen.
It's kind of funny you put me on either side. I've got like a couple of okay, affirmative case. A free market economy. Like, I should note that like you don't exactly specify Christian ethics because the word Christian came from the Romans technically. So therefore, I mean, you're probably dealing with like the idea of moral governing of money as probably more of a Jewish ethic. How would you respond to the idea that, of government systems like being based on their use rather than like, I don't know, like it's kind of hard to explain. Like, I mean, we've proven that communism is useless. So like, okay, here you go.
Sure. A question from the affirmative case. Your argument seems to assume, or perhaps hope, that when we meet each other in the economic sphere, we do so as equals. But of course, that's not the case. There's tremendous power differentials between people when we meet economically or anywhere else. This is true within America. It's even more true globally. Given that reality, cannot the outcome of any economic interaction be just? Isn't it going to be, by definition, unjust, given the power differentials between economic actors?
That's a good question. I think we're blessed to live in a system that is not zero-sum. And that means that when one person benefits, it does not necessarily mean that another person is losing out. I think in a market economy with a fair, competent government regulation, people who are more blessed with wealth can benefit from an economic exchange, as well as those who are perhaps disenfranchised. And we can all benefit from those exchanges. So.
Just to add that that there can be many just interactions because people often recognize that their own profit, their own self-interest is very much related to their ability to meet the interest of the other. And so many interactions between people on the market can be and are mutually beneficial. It is true that there is some disparity of power, and in a fallen world we do need to recognize that this is always going to be the case. But in general, when the goodness of human nature is expressed, which the free market does allow to happen on a more frequent basis than other systems, more of these mutually beneficial interactions can happen.
Okay, before we go to the concluding statements, does the negative case have one last burning question you want to pose to the affirmative case? And I'll give you guys a chance to pose them a question, then we'll go to the final wrap-up statement.
Okay, yes we do. Christian ethics offers a holistic sense of self-interest. Scripture instructs us not to lead lives of excess, but lives of communal and spiritual abundance. Does the free market system address self-interest holistically and encourage flourishing of the mind and spirit as well?
Yes.
And if so, elaborate.
Sorry?
And can you elaborate?
Okay, yes, I will. One of the ways I would say it allows for that is if, take for example, a church today, supposing that you lived in a village without any access to another village, you may never have the opportunity to bond with the rest of your the church members across the globe. But because of technology that's been developed and because of capitalism, people have more access to each other. That's one way that we've been able to form bonds as Christians and have deeper relational lives and social lives.
I've often heard it said that free market economies destroy traditional communities, and I would counter that by saying that maybe those communities weren't so great in the first place, and that in the United States that we value communities more that we can enter voluntarily through our churches and schools like Gordon, and those communities are richer than communities that people did not have a choice to be a part of. So.
Okay, we have a final burning question to pose to the negative.
Yes, this is kind of based on the reality of lives in poor nations. People often have children based on their economic potential, and this is often why sons are preferred. But in affluent societies, children are more often sources of joy and love rather than mere subsistence. And I'm wondering what your argument is for a society where children have become an economic tool.
We definitely think that that's a great thing, but that's one...
Not that children are economic tools.
Yeah, yeah. However,
I guess I don't think we would ever advocate for such a system. I don't think that's ever what we were trying to do. Also, I would just like to point out that poverty's a crime. It's actually like a violent crime that we don't really address. And as we've shown, and I hope it's been ample enough, there's like extreme poverty that exists despite the free market and capitalism. So what are we to do with that? So I guess we would just answer, maybe throw back the question, the fact that I don't really feel like you've given us a very good reason to believe that children are valued so highly when so many are actually starving.
And we also can't equate capitalism with affluence, which I think your question kind of assumes that in a capitalist society we will be affluent. That's not the case. So.
Okay. I can respond to that. If children are starving, that is a bad thing. And that's why we advocate inviting those countries into a more flourishing free market system. And I'm not saying capitalism is a source of happiness and that that's why we enjoy children, but if your children are able to eat and they're also able to go to school and they're also able to benefit from wealth, then that certainly means that they're having a happier existence.
Okay, remaining genuine questions will have to be addressed in the concluding statement. So again, with the affirmative cases, concluding statements, and then we'll go to
We know that the free market, like any system created in a fallen world, is not perfect. However, it does provide the greatest hope to alleviate poverty, and it is compatible with Christian ethics. Since the free market system, the wealth of nations has increased astronomically. Better economies have allowed for advances in technology, medicine, and quality of life. Every nation that has accepted a free market economy has improved. Moreover, the free market has given us the opportunity to find our vocation. No longer are we forced to labor endless hours in unfulfilling work just to feed our families. We can use our God-given gifts and talents to pursue lives in the arts, academics, medicine, law, and business, and find personal meaning in our work. When we enjoy what we do and are satisfied with our lives, we tend to be more invested in our work and in the people around us. The problems that many Christians face today is how we should care for the poor. We want to do good. When we see images of starving children, we want to help. The free market provides us with the means to do this, to make the words of Isaiah a reality, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke, to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe them, and not to turn from your own flesh and blood. Every week at Gordon, we are asked to give money to a different worthy cause. Some would say that all Christians are obligated to live in poverty in order to help the poor. We instead support solidarity with the poor by bringing them into the community of wealth creation. By bringing them into the community of wealth creation rather than only giving them charitable handouts. We can and should give to those charities that specifically strike our hearts, to support our families, churches, and other charitable organizations, and together with our communities, support those programs that God calls us to support by good stewardship of the wealth with which we have been blessed. Yet the free market has not only given us the opportunity to help the poor, it has given the poor the opportunity to help themselves. One of the greatest benefits of the market system is that it gives those who have been enslaved by poverty the opportunity to break their chains and live lives of dignity. The free market allows people in the developing world to find jobs in factories and shops, and they often choose these jobs over lives of barely making it. They can feed their families. They do not have to depend on the charity of wealthy nations in order to survive. They can build lives for themselves with their own hands and their own skills. People all over the world can purchase medicine for diseases that once decimated previous generations. Miriam in Tanzania used a loan to begin her business and now employs 2 people and sends her children to school. The free market means that people are not only able to eat, they are able to improve their situations and escape poverty. The critiques you have heard from the other team may apply to people in the wealthy world, but that does not mean that we can or should take away the opportunity for the poor in other countries to better their lives. This opportunity is a direct result of the free market. We are human beings created in the image of God. It is in our very nature to work and create. The free market gives all people, the wealthy in America and the poor in Africa, the opportunity to fulfill this innate God-given destiny. We must remember that the free market is the worst system, except for all the others. Given the industrialized and globalized society we have today, the free market is the only way to generate wealth and alleviate poverty. This is the time of the market economy.
This is the time to move from aid to enterprise, from redistribution to wealth creation, from paternalism to partnerships, from encouraging dependency to integrating the poor into communities of productivity and exchange, from subsidies and protectionism to open trade and fair competition, from seeing the global economy as a fixed pie to understanding that human enterprise can grow economies, and from seeing the poor as merely a burden to seeing them as fellow creators. Thank you.
It is clear to all of us that the market creates wealth. However, is that capital enough to convince us of the system's good? Considering that the wealth created is unfairly distributed, hardly shared, and that the system appeals to man's fallen nature for its very survival, shall we continue pretending that the free market holds opportunities for everyone or interface easily with Christian ethics? Tonight we have heard how this market utilizes man's baser tendencies towards selfishness, greed, and materialism in order to sustain competition and economic growth. We have also heard how this economic system continually reduces man's intrinsic value to a matter of mere profit. Though the market boasts of financial benefits for many, we found instead that the system further exacerbates social stratification and community conflicts as a massive income disparity increases. Noting these inherent traits from the free market, it becomes clear that such a system is incompatible with Christian call to worship God alone, protect the poor, and live righteously. The life God intends for us is one of joyful reliance on Him and wholehearted care for others. We are not suggesting that everyone seek poverty, neglect their families, or willfully abandon their businesses. Rather, we agree with the Apostle Paul as he wrote, "Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard-pressed, but that there might be equality. As it is written, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little." While Scripture does not condemn worldly possessions, the Bible warns us against trusting in our wealth. Jesus said that He came here so we might have life and have it abundantly. But He also admonished us to be on guard against all kinds of greed, for life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. We recognize that God blesses some with material fortune. However, Christians must always remain wary of wealth's effects on our faith and value system. Throughout Scripture, we find stories, proverbs, and parables which demonstrate the destructive force of wealth upon man's morality and faith. In the midst of great abundance, humans are quick to disown God. Helplessly fallen and prideful creatures, we place our trust instead in our own material possession. Looking at the Bible, we see how Israel, when well-fed and safe, continually becomes complacent and rejected God. Jesus warns us, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the writer of Proverbs 30 humbly petitions God to give him neither poverty nor riches, because an abundance of wealth might induce him to forget his Creator. We are taught instead to cultivate an attitude of dependence on God for our daily bread. Unlike the free market system, our Lord cares deeply for the welfare of the mankind. In the Old Testament, we see that the compassionate trade and production are central economic guidelines for the Israelites. God's chosen people must pay fair wages, care gently for the land, and consider the poor, the disadvantaged, and the alien among them. The Israelites were commanded to give their land and their workers times of rest. And during harvest, they were enjoined to go through their fields only once, so the poor could glean what remained. God promises that He would care for His people as they devoted themselves to caring for others. The freedom God calls us to cannot be found within the free market. Rather, freedom is achieved when we surrender our understanding of the world to the command and provision of God, who asks us to serve Him first, love our neighbors, care for all creation, and live morally. We do not claim to have all the answers, but we cannot be satisfied with a system that distorts desire, ignores need, relies on selfishness, and reduces our relationships to means of the market. While a new economic system may not be obvious, we should not stop at second best. As Christians, we know that the ways of the world are unacceptable to God. Though we are in the world, we must not be of it. Both Jesus and his disciples admit that our faith brings inevitable hardship. However, their message is never one of complacency or compromise. We must be willing to exercise our faith and rely on the Lord's provision, rather than on the markets. Knowing that through Christ all things are possible, we remain hopeful that we may find ways not merely to subvert, but to reform our current economy, making room for more compassionate, appreciative, holistic, and stewarded practices so that we all live and have it abundantly. Have life and have it abundantly. Thank you.
I was going to tell them, be kind to one another. No. Okay, now again, it's your turn to vote. Remember, you're not voting on your favorite student up here or the position that you hold in your heart of hearts about the resolution. But which team, and you're not voting on, like lemmings, what your neighbor decides to do. So get in your mind what team you think made the most compelling case for the position that they were asked to argue. We have our professional counters here, culled from the biblical studies. Okay, if you follow tennis, I always feel like the father of Venus and Serena Williams. I'm kind of watching them play. You want them both to win and comity to prevail afterwards. But a close vote, but the negative case carried it by 111 to 95. So this is the case. No booing, no booing. Well, let me make just a final announcement. I mean, they've really been working quite a bit, especially these past few weeks and days on this. I think they're probably all relieved to step out of the debater's role that they've been placed in. And this year, we're very pleased that during the college's symposium on Thursday at 10:30 in the morning, is that right, 10:30? 10:30, right here in the science building in room 124, they're going to sort of discuss what they learned outside of their roles as debaters, and there'll be actually a selective viewing of kind of parts of the debate, and they'll be discussing not as members of a team, but just as individuals, what they learned just in the process about the resolution, about public speaking, about whatever they want to talk about, I suppose, on 10:30 Thursday morning. So I encourage you all to come to that. And again, they're a wonderful group of students. Let's give them a hand. Go in peace.